and welcome back to another episode of Mystery Red Reads. I'm your host, Mystery Red, and this is my disclaimer. This beta read in concrete is at the author's request. This video is for learning purposes. Today we're looking at a piece of fan fiction. We are back with The Great Wicked and Unbreakable Bonds, a Star Wars fanfic, and we are on chapter 5. Are we on chapter 5? Are we? Really? I feel like we were further into the story. No, we are on chapter 5. Okay. So, I used to give like a summary of where we are and where we've been, but The Great Wicked has a summary for us, and we are going to read that. And I have an entire playlist for The Great Wicked, so you can just go in if you want to follow all of the Unbreakable Bonds story. You can read it from the listen from the beginning, or if you want, there is a link to the story on AO3, and that will be in the description. And with that, we are going to dive in here. Chapter 5, Decisions and Distance. Summary. Following the council's decision about Solon and his mother, Obi-Wan and Cressida are confronted with a much-needed conversation. Obi-Wan grapples with the desire to address their shared history, but Cressida seems hesitant to delve into the past. Instead, they focus on the pressing matters at hand, discussing Obi-Wan's role in teaching and raising his son, while reminiscing about their shared memories from their youth. A fleeting connection is felt, but quickly dissipates, marking the end of their meeting. Notes. Number 1, this is part 2 of the Unbreakable Bonds saga, but you do not have to read part 1. It just provides the history of the events that brought Obi-Wan and Cressida together. This is an explicit work. I don't believe there's anything in this chapter. I think The Great Wicked would flag me, and I'd pop up a trigger warning, and we would just not speak out loud the parts that we can't. Thanks to YouTube. Number 2, please note that the continuity between chapters is due to the fact that this story is over a year old and undergoing a rewrite as I progress as a writer. Any chapters that are named chapters, for example, Return to Coruscant, are an indication that that chapter has been edited. 3, this story is rated explicit for adult content, including depictions of violence and, are we allowed to say that? I don't even know if we're allowed to say that. Those kind of encounters between consenting adults, but this chapter contains no explicit content. Any explicit content will be marked by a double page break. Let's see, 4, if you like this story but are not interested in NSFW content, then fear not. For a SFW version is posted to my fanfic.net account due to their guidelines prohibiting such content, and it can also be enjoyed there. My username is the same, The Great Wicked, and the story title also remains the same. Number 5, chapter info for Red. That would be me, you guys. Okay, here we go. Oh my goodness, here we go. I'm gonna laugh. Sometimes I butcher these names, and I try so hard. Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka was mentioned last chapter, and I neglected to give you a pronunciation for her name. My bad, though. No worries. You did great. I don't know that I did. I probably did Ashoka. Ahsoka. Okay, so when I'm reading, I may have to refer back to this. Okay. Banthus wampus. These are large animals throughout the Star Wars universe. Wampus are large carnivorous animals like bears. Think Empire Strikes Back when Luke is in the ice cave. I thought that was like a, oh my gosh, what is it, a Yeti? No. Abominable Snowman? That's what I remember being a kid watching that and thinking that it was an abominable snowman. That is what my little brain came up with. So that's kind of where I associate it. But I mean, I guess it works, right? Okay. Banthas are herbivores. Think mammoth, elephants. Togruta are a species in Star Wars with orange skin. Ahsoka Tano is a Togruta. Sorasu is a lightsaber form that is also called Form 3, and it focuses on impenetrable defense. Okay, I need to remember all this. Am I going to remember all this? Guys, at least we got a resource to reference, okay? I just don't want it to break up the flow when I'm reading. Sorasu is a lightsaber form that is also called Form 3. So I'm going to keep reading, and then I'm pondering the form part. I'm thinking like a strike, like an action, or like a kata, as a form like a kata. Okay, this is a form that Obi-Wan is considered the absolute master of. Sorasu. Okay, form 3. And he switches from form 4, Ataru, highly aggressive, to form 3 after his master Qui-Gon is killed. Qui-Gon practiced form 4. Bacta. This is a medical substance to aid in healing. You see Luke in a Bacta tank after the aforementioned episode with the Wampa. It speeds up healing as much as the body is able to heal on its own, but if the body is damaged so much it can't heal on its own, then Bacta won't magically fix it. That is why the Bacta tank never helped Vader despite how much time he spent in it. He was a little too crispy. As far as I know, Star Wars fans do not have a cute nickname like Shellheads, and I looked it up to be sure. We're just called Star Wars fans, though I've come across Warsies a few times. The blue lock on my stories you asked about means that my story is locked and is only available for registered AO3 users to view or interact with. This cuts down on bots leaving me AI-generated comments. And there was a brief scare about stories being stolen, and locking them was a security thing that was supposed to help them from being stolen, I think. I'm happy to help you do this if you like. I don't know. I mean, I guess people steal, I mean, they do it with fan art, so I can see it, where they steal someone's story and publish it somewhere else and put their name on it. To my knowledge, no one has done that with my work. It doesn't mean that no one has done that with any of my work, because my work is cross-published in multiple places, usually fanfic.net, AO3, and DeviantArt. Although only certain pieces are posted in certain places, I think my best works are posted on AO3, and that is my primary place that I post work. Sometimes I get scared that something will happen to AO3 and it'll go down and we'll lose everything. I don't know that I have original documents anymore for these stories. A lot of my work that's published is like years and years old. And it's been probably a year or two since I've published anything, I think, on AO3. I really would like to write, but I just haven't been... I've been working on my original fiction and not really religiously. And then I've come across a block when plotting. As I evolved as a writer and improved, one of the side effects was it became more difficult to be a pantser. I generally had an idea of where I was going with a story, but not how I was going to get there. And I do love to lay little morsels along the way and tie it all together later on. But the muse just was having a plot block. Like, I just was blocked on every plot that I came up with, and I couldn't figure out why or how I was stuck. So I just went back to kind of my round robin writing so that I would keep writing. But lately, there's been things going on in our personal lives, and my girls and I have not been able to write together. So I started doing this. So I guess you guys benefit from it. You're benefiting from my roadblock, and I do hope that I get inspired and come back, and we'll see what happens. Okay. I don't know if I want it locked up. I like that I have not, to my knowledge, had problem with AI generated comments. I mean, I guess they could be. I haven't, but I feel like I would know. Would you know? I mean, do you have examples? Have you received some? Like, what would I look for? Because I do still get kudos. Usually it's kudos, and usually it's from a registered user, and my comments tend to come through from registered users too. Do AI generated comments come through looking like a registered user? I mean, would it appear that way, or would it be under like a guest? I'm just curious. I don't know. If I suddenly get on the alert and wish I had done more and been more proactive, I will reach out to you and we will get me fixed. But in the meantime, I'm just kind of like, I'm okay. I want people to be able to read my work. I even want people to be able to see my mistakes, especially if it's people that listen to me talk here, so they can see that I have been on the journey that I am sharing with you. Okay, so the knowledge that I've acquired has been through practice and through research. And I have grown, and I continue to grow and improve, and I can see it in my writing. And when I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so embarrassed. Should I take that down? Should I revise that? Oh my gosh. I have things where I switch tense mid chapter, mid story, back and forth, between stories. And that's usually happens when I write like in first person and I get really caught up in it and I flip flop between past and present. And it's easier for me to be more consistent if I write third person limited. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because of how close I get into my character's mind and what they're experiencing. I've got a whole bunch of things we can poke holes in my own writing, and I'm able to see that, but I'm also able to leave it out there for other people to see that I'm not acting like a know-it-all or an end-all be-all. I'm just sharing experience and how I figured it out. And I know that some people learn through talking about things, seeing examples. And when other people share their writing, we get to see examples as they pop up and then all the circumstances surrounding it. And then I'm able to say, this is what we want. This is the goal we want to reach. How can we get there? And so the viewer gets to go on that journey and hopefully pick up some tips and pointers along the logic between it. And then you absorb it as something you get to put into practice. And then you don't need me to say it to you anymore because it becomes part of how you write. I think that fan fiction writers who really practice it the way you do, you and I do, Wicked, is we come up with a clean first draft. Like our first draft comes out cleaner than what a typical first draft will be because we have implemented the practice of writing, and sometimes we publish when our story's not complete. That always stresses me out because I feel obligated to finish a story. I have I think one that I did not finish. And it just bothers me that it's out there and I have my name on it and it's an incomplete story and I feel like that's a failure. That's probably a very difficult, hard look down at myself, but at the same time, I'm very hard on myself as a writer, and I set a very high standard for my document going out. We publish as we go, or we're publishing something that is not going through an editor, and so we tend to, if we are advancing and growing as writers, we will see the transition from our first story and the progression into our most recent stories, how much the writing evolves. Okay. That's my point. And you can go and view my stuff and look at the very oldest things, the very oldest pieces, and then look at the newest pieces, and you will see a huge difference. There are all the things that I talk about in my work. Okay. 6, red. Don't you panic. Don't you worry, Cressida is not going to die. Okay. Did I talk about that yet? Did I talk about my don't kill the protagonist, don't kill the heroes, my personal preference? I feel like I've probably had side rants about all of my writing preferences at some point in some video. To summarize them for everybody just joining us, welcome to my little quirky brain. People went on, there are trends in writing as there are trends in anything else. And a couple years ago, the trend became to kill off the main character or kill off his best friend or her best friend or their best friend, all right? Or, their sidekick or whatever, to kill off someone that was important. Well, unless you are killing them to progress the story, don't do it just to do it because it's what everybody's doing and you think that it's expected. It's disappointing. First of all, I read and I write to escape reality. Okay. Everybody doesn't have to die. Okay. Eventually, but part of the writing world is we don't have to go to that point. All right. We don't have to unless we need it and we have no other choice in the plot, in the story, that it requires it. And those circumstances do come up. There has to be a life-changing moment sometime in the character growth and the character breakthrough. And they have to experience a loss in order to recognize and move forward and grow. Okay? That is when it should happen. But it should not be something we do in every single story because that's the thing to do now. All right? This story has a guaranteed happy ending for all major parties involved, which is why it is part of my how it should have ended universe. Oh, a how it should have ended universe. I can so get behind that because I'm going to tell you what, TMNT 2012 was my favorite verse, okay? It was kind of my journey back to my childhood, but I got to see it in a way that I really wanted it years ago. It was the most accurate depiction of teenagers, but I really feel like season 5 of that series was awful. It was like they knew the show was ending and they just got, it was just horrible. I can't even make myself watch the episodes, and I love the characters. Okay, I can't even finish the season. I start it, I get bored, and I start doing something else, or I'm just disappointed. I'm just flat out disappointed. Likewise, it's the same way with they were the last Ronin, the ending of the story of the TMNT. Okay, I don't want to read it because they're all dying or dead. Okay, that's literally how it ends. That's depressing to me. The problem is, I want the turtles to get to use their weapons, and I want people to get hurt, and I want there to be blood. It's kind of like, I've realized my daughter has gotten me into watching anime, and I didn't think I would like it. And I'm actually loving it because I'm getting everything I wish the turtles were animated in Japan. Okay. And we were getting that level of storytelling in their universe. Okay. Because they deserve it. The characters are fantastic characters, and they deserve that kind of depth and dimension and growth. And so when I write for the fandom, I write what I want for them that I'm just not getting anywhere else. And I really feel like I kind of just wish they would license them over to Japan, and or make a partnership or do something to where we were getting an anime styled TMNT in and that it was rated for teens, and it had the blood and the cursing and the whole bit, because it's fantastic. It really lends to those characters and their background. Anyway, so just, that's a fandom rant. I get to do that here because we are in a fandom zone right now. All right. Okay. So I'm going to relax and just enjoy the ride, the romance between Obi-Wan and Cressida, and I get to just enjoy the story. Okay. Thank you for letting me know I do not have to worry. All right. 7. Thank you to Mystery Red Reads for reading my content and being so kind with your crits and praise. Go check out her channel where she reads and crits fan fiction and original fiction, and give her some support. Maybe buy her a coffee. Yes, guys, please buy me a coffee. I like coffee. I like coffee a lot. You can find her on YouTube and then my lovely address. Okay, 10 out of 10 cannot recommend me enough. I mean it. Subscribing is free. Likes are free too. So many people get a video. Even the people I make the videos for, and they don't even like their own video. I'm like, you guys, come on. You got to at least like your own video. All right. And I know that I've got I don't have a ton of subscribers, but I have subscribers that I'm not reading for yet. So if you're like hovering around there, kind of like wishing, don't be scared. Because first of all, I'll do a private read for you if you want it and if you're worried about it. And if you like how it turns out, I can always publish it. And if you don't want it published, I can keep it private for you. I have people I read nothing but private for. That don't get anything published. So it's a personal choice, and I respect it. And you can still get the same experience and not have to worry about anything. All right. Here is one of her lovely images. I love, love, love it. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Unbreakable Bonds. What is the distinction between a sentinel and a statue? The statue will crack long before the sentinel does. Oh my gosh. I'm liking Cressida so much and her story. Warning, canon divergence in original character content. Please do not translate, copy, or repost without permission. You're so smart to protect your work. I'm just kind of out there, and I really should be protecting my work more. But, oh my goodness, what is wrong with me? I have no excuse for not doing it. I don't, except that I do want anybody to be able to read it. And I have not had the AI problem yet that I know of. Okay. Chapter 5, Decisions and Distance. This chapter contains no explicit content. What is the distinction between a sentinel and a statue? The statue will crack long before the sentinel does. Oh my goodness. Do you know how mad that makes me when it's right out the gate and I'm tripping over it, and it's not, this is not you, this is me. Why do I take a minute to warm up every single time I get started to read? It's so frustrating. Okay, I took a sip of water. We're going to try that again. No. 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 No, you guys. No. All right, let's try it one more time. The anecdotal proverb was well known, though Obi-Wan couldn't recall when he'd first heard it. When he was younger, he had thought it was merely an exaggeration, a caricature of the mysterious sentinels that so many knew so little about. However, with age, and as his understanding of the secretive sect deepened, he began to see the comparison as less a jest and more a complex reflection of their true nature. Sentinels were often seen as imposing shadows within the Jedi Order. Their presence, when noticed at all, was commanding and their demeanor stoic. Many who stood before them felt a natural urge to shrink back or hurry past. Discovering that Cressida had joined their ranks all those years ago was hardly surprising, even if it had initially caught him off guard. Yet, what he was looking at now didn't match the anecdote at all. The council sat in their familiar formation, their solemn faces framed by the grand arches overhead, each line of the room drawing the eye inward. Across the polished floor, their collective gaze centering on the space where Cressida Vox stood alone. She appeared the epitome of Jedi calm, but the longer Obi-Wan looked, the more he noticed. Cressida had tells, like anyone else. Not even years of training could completely erase them. Insecurities always ran deep. Anyone else looking at her would probably see a confident woman unaffected by the goings-on around her. Not Obi-Wan. Like all great deceptions, the truth was found in the tiniest things, starting from the ground up. Her feet were shoulder-width apart, creating a strong foundation that appeared unshakable. But as he focused in on her scuffed boots, he saw it. A rolling bump that disappeared and reappeared with no real pattern or timing. She was curling her toes. Like discovering a broken link in armor, he began seeing more signs that belied her anxiousness. I'm inclined to suggest you swap that out to anxiety. Although the sound anxiousness does lend itself to your voice, so that was just a thought passing. We have to observe it because we know that my brain will trip up over the rest of the story if I don't. We're going to keep going. Her hands seemed to rest at her sides, but there was an unnatural rigidity in her fingers that suggested anything but ease. They were locked into a position that only mimicked casualness, and it was her thumbs that gave it away. The way they tucked inward, rubbing and tapping against her palms at odd, repetitive intervals, a habit she hadn't outgrown. Then there was her breathing. The rise and fall of her chest was off. There was a pause after each inhale. She was holding her breath, and each time she did, it took longer for her to exhale steadily. He wondered if she even knew she was doing it. Everything about what he was looking at screamed of a facade held together by fraying threads. He shifted in his seat, redirecting his attention back to Mace, who had been speaking the whole time. Fortunately, Obi-Wan had something of a knack for keeping track of multiple conversations at once, so he hadn't missed much. Sentinel Vox, we recognize that these past few weeks have no doubt been challenging for you and your son, filled with uncertainty and difficult questions. We regret that our decision regarding your son's future has taken longer than expected. For that, you have this council's apologies. Cressida gave a simple nod, her expression impassive, but once again her nerves were given away by another tell, a tick in her jaw. He didn't blame her. Most individuals who found themselves standing before the High Council were not there for a positive reason. The Jedi were staunch with praise, and grand gestures were not really in line with the image of humble warrior monks they projected. If not praise or commendation, then the only other reason to be where Cressida stood was they were either waiting for a decision or worse, to face consequences. The room felt charged, and the stillness was unbearable. He found himself gripping the armrest of his seat just a little too tightly in a vain attempt to steady his racing thoughts. His absence from the previous meetings meant that he was just in the dark as Cressida was, and it was awful. Now, to the matter at hand, Mace said, with little in the way of emotion. This has not been an easy decision. Councils of the past would have denied your son's admittance to the order for several reasons. His age is much older than what is deemed suitable for initiates. We lack the structure to accommodate him. And his attachment to you, his mother, presents challenges. These factors have given us reason for pause. His voice carried out his authoritative hard edge, but he wasn't unsympathetic, and that hardness softened for his next query. If the council were to deny your son a place here at the temple, what exactly would your plan be? We would leave, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Solon has a desire to learn, and it's his right. I would continue his training elsewhere to the best of my abilities. Obi-Wan's pulse quickened. The idea of Solon and Cressida walking away from the Order just as he'd discovered their connection was just as devastating as Solon being refused a place there. An understandable response, Mace replied. It was difficult to make any sense of where his thoughts were. The Clone Wars have weakened our ranks. With disasters like Geonosis still fresh in our minds, we cannot afford to lose even a single Jedi. We must be at all times vigilant and ready for the next threat. If the Order is to survive, we must adapt. Cressida stood perfectly still, but her thumbs pressed into her palms and her breaths grew longer, more deliberate. Obi-Wan's unease deepened at the sight. He hoped she wasn't so nervous as to lock her knees. The last thing he wanted was to see her pass out. Surely she had more sense than that. We have spoken with those who know you well and confirmed what we can. Was Mace drawing this out on purpose? Stars, just get on with it. Obi-Wan was ready to rip his own hair out, and he was fairly certain his fingerprints would be permanently seared into the armrest. And with his considerable and insistent input from Master Skywalker, Obi-Wan shot a glance at Anakin, who offered a confident nod and his well-worn smirk. He felt his pulse racing. He hated this dreadful suspense. Things like this were exactly the reason he despised politics. I'm going to pause. 2 tiny little things here. I said were instead of was. I think it should be were. And instead of having he felt, go ahead and say his pulse was racing. Okay? Or his pulse, or even leave out the was and just say his pulse racing. I guess in the context you should say his pulse was racing. Okay, racing. I'm going to reread it and swap it out with his pulse was racing, and I'm going to read it as were again, and you can see if you like it. Obi-Wan shot a glance at Anakin, who offered a confident nod in his well-worn smirk. His pulse was racing. He hated this dreadful suspense. Things like this were exactly the reason he despised politics. It is the decision of this council that there is no reason that 2 such exemplary Jedi should not see their son granted the same opportunity as any other youngling. The air rushed from the room, and though no one spoke or cheered, the atmosphere softened, as if everyone had been hoping for this outcome all along. The approval was more felt than seen, though the varied reactions of several masters made it quietly clear. Anakin made no effort to hide his delight. A wide grin split his face, and he sat up straighter, nodding as if he had never doubted the outcome for a moment. Master Yoda didn't smile, but a quiet warmth radiated from him as his hand rested lightly on his walking stick, fingers curling just a little tighter. Master Ki-Adi-Mundi remained reserved, his expression neutral. As a strict adherent to the rules, if anyone were to push back, Obi-Wan expected it to be him. Yet there was no visible sign of objection. Obi-Wan released his grip. His fingers had practically been sticking to the metal from perspiration. There was little change in Cressida's posture, aside from a controlled breath she blew out and an almost unnoticeable drop in her shoulders. Force-sensitive children have come to the temple at all ages to hone their connection to the Force, and Solon Kyle will be no exception. But Mace paused, and there it was, Obi-Wan thought, the inevitable caveat. Just because a favorable outcome has been achieved does not mean the hard work is over. Solon's path will be a difficult one. At this time, he has no formal training, and his abilities, while evident, remain largely unrefined. His training must be a tailored approach to ensure that he has every advantage and opportunity that can be afforded to him so that he might reach his full potential. That being said, we must speak on how exactly this arrangement will work. A surge of defensiveness rose in Obi-Wan at the mention of Solon's lack of training, though he wasn't sure if it was for Solon or Cressida's sake. But deep down he knew Mace wasn't wrong. As it faded, it gave way to curiosity. He had to admit that he'd wonder himself how they might navigate such an unusual situation. Solon couldn't be placed with a clan like other younglings. Would he stay with his mother? Would they all cohabitate together? Solon will have to prove that he's capable. Therefore, he will be required to pass the initiate trials just as any other youngling would. Well, now that wasn't so unreasonable, and Obi-Wan nodded in agreement. It had been a while since the trials had taken place, postponed by the needs of the war. Cressida, it is unreasonable to expect you to remove yourself from Solon's life. Such an abrupt change would cause more harm than good. Therefore, he will remain under your guardianship and stay with you. However, I want to make one thing clear. He leaned forward, his finger raised in emphasis. You are not, and will never be, your son's master. Her composed demeanor faltered for a fraction of a second, as if grappling with a change she hadn't fully embraced. It was in that small retreat, that soft exhale, the beginning of a new distance forming between her and Solon. She offered Mace a singular nod in lieu of any words that might betray her feelings. I'm going to pause because, read her response, okay? So she had been prepared to tell them that they would leave together and she would continue to train him, in which term she would be his master. So she's making a choice right now by accepting what their terms are. She must think it's for his greater good, I guess. I'm guessing. A parent makes these decisions with the information they have and they hope for the best. But she's making a choice right now. She can still say, I don't agree to your terms and I'm out, because apparently she was able to say, if you don't want him, I'm going to leave with him and I'm going to continue to teach him. So there's all that. Okay. Let's see. As a Jedi and a mother, no role is of greater importance than the other, but your duties must remain a priority, and you will continue to serve the Council of First Knowledge, Mace continued. You cannot be in two places at once, and Solon will need more than your guidance alone as he steps into this new chapter. His training, his development, will require both strength and balance. You'll need a partner in this, someone to support Solon in your absence, and you as well. Mace paused, allowing the weight of his words to linger before his gaze shifted past her, landing on Obi-Wan. Master Kenobi? Obi-Wan rose to his feet, surprised to find his legs steady beneath him. His hands found each other behind his back, the dampness of his palms hidden beneath the fabric of his robes. He stepped forward, positioning himself beside Cressida, acutely aware of the gap between them. Outwardly, he was composed, standing tall, shoulders squared, but beneath that facade an uneasy tremor rippled through him. Mace looked from Cressida to Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan, no one would begrudge you if you choose to step away from this situation. Cressida stiffened, her eyes darting around the room like a panicked creature seeking an escape. Was she honestly afraid of such a reaction? One does not simply wake up one morning to a 10-year-old son and adapt to such a change overnight. But the Council hopes you will embrace this new role as any other. What say you? All eyes turned to Obi-Wan, and the quiet in the room felt fragile. He barely registered the stillness as he locked eyes with Mace and cleared his throat. Drawing on the poise that earned him the nickname the Great Negotiator, he spoke with the confidence he hoped would reassure them both. There was a time during the chaos of war when I told Anakin that teaching is a privilege. While I never expected to find myself in such a position, I would be remiss to decline the chance to grow as both a Jedi and an individual. Obi-Wan paused and drew in a deep breath so that his words were firm and steady. I accept my duty and responsibility as Solon's father, and I will, of course, offer my unwavering support to Cressida from this moment forward. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of emotion in Cressida's expression, a blend of relief and quiet happiness. It was his first true acknowledgement of his role as Solon's father. As if drawn by an invisible thread, she turned her head just slightly to meet his gaze. The corners of her lips tugged upward into a small smile. Mace, seemingly pleased enough with the response, looked to the doors, and with a soft hiss they slid open. Obi-Wan felt his breath hitch in his chest. Pausing. All right, so it's reading. Oh my gosh, amazing. Really quick. Sometimes you will have to use the word felt. But generally, when I see it, it's one of the words that I screen for, and when I see it, and in my own writing, I go back and I look at it and I ask myself, okay, is there something I can say other than felt, or another way I could word this? Mace, seemingly pleased enough with the response, looked to the doors, and with a soft hiss, they slid open. Obi-Wan's breath hitched in his... I would just say hitched, okay? I would say Obi-Wan's breath hitched. So you're omitting felt, which is a distancing word at least in this use of it, okay? It's distancing, and you've got it so nice and so tight, and it's so beautiful that we don't want to do that. So Obi-Wan's breath hitched, and then you're still with Obi-Wan, and you almost feel like your breath goes too, okay? You don't have to say in his chest. You can just say that his breath hitched, okay? He hadn't seen his son since the first meeting 3.5 weeks ago, and in that time the boy had consumed his thoughts. Then suddenly, there he was. Solon hesitated at the threshold, glancing between the imposing temple guards flanking the council chamber. They loomed like silent statues, their watchful eyes fixed on him. He moved slowly as he edged past them, his shoulders curling inward as if trying to make himself so small that they wouldn't notice him. But such a thing was an impossibility. Nothing escaped their vigilant gaze. The moment he stepped beyond their reach, his pace quickened. Not a run, not quite a jog, but the hurried movement of someone eager to escape the shadow of a dark corner. Obi-Wan didn't blame him. He'd seen that same quiet nervousness in countless others. The guards simply had that effect. Solon's eyes found his mother, a sense of refuge seeming to wash over him. He didn't break into a smile, but his shoulders dropped, and his gait relaxed as he approached. It was then that he finally registered Obi-Wan's presence beside Cressida. Their gazes locked, and Obi-Wan found himself drawn into the most mesmerizing pair of eyes he'd ever seen. One glimmered a vivid oceanic blue, reminiscent of his own, while the other softened in a soft gray that mirrored the clouds in his mother's eyes. Got an echo on soft right there. So differently, yet so closely related, creating a unique harmony that was both striking and beautiful. Solon's posture tensed again, and his steps slowed so much that it reminded Obi-Wan of a cat assessing something unfamiliar and dangerous in its path. The way their bodies slunk closer to the ground, they never took their eyes off the possible predator, and they moved cautiously. That was how Solon was looking at him. I'm going to pause to acknowledge there are a smattering of adverbs sprinkled throughout here. It's been working so far, but I am noticing them. I'm just observing it and acknowledging it, so my brain will let me continue to read. You can always do a search for them if you want, or keep going. It was different between them now. Now that they both knew the truth, the resemblance between them stood out more than ever. The subtle details he hadn't noticed before, sharper and more clear. Solon's hair was worn a little longer than Obi-Wan's, but undeniably similar in texture and color. Anakin's voice echoed in his mind. He definitely has your nose. And indeed, Obi-Wan saw it now. That familiar narrow curve, though Solon lacked the small bump on the bridge that Obi-Wan had from a long-heeled break. It was hard to tell, but it looked like Solon even had a small cleft in his chin, like Obi-Wan. It was something of an awkward standoff, to say the least, so Obi-Wan did the only thing he could do. He smiled at Solon. Its effect was almost instantaneous, and the boy's lips curled into a smile in return as he came to stand by Cressida's side. His shoulders straightened, his chin lifted as he mimicked his mother's steady, composed mannerisms, like he'd watched her and learned to stand tall when it mattered most. Okay, it's so beautiful. You've got a little echo on smile there. You have two of them. You could swap one out for a grin, and I think it would work just as well, especially with a little boy, okay? But like his mother, his attempts at an outwardly calm facade were not without their flaws. The boy's fingers fidgeted subtly behind his back, and Obi-Wan caught the telltale curl of his toes in his boots, the same sign of nerves that Cressida herself betrayed when she was uneasy. So you've got outwardly, and where's the other one? There's another one in here, subtly. Okay, so yeah, I would do a little search. Obviously, for fan fiction, this is reading so beautifully, you can leave it as it is. But for writing growth purposes, I'm going to observe it, also so that my brain permits me to keep reading, and we're just going to carry on. Solon was nervous too. "How are you, Solon?" Mace asked, his posture relaxing as he leaned forward, elbows on his legs, putting Solon at ease. Though whether he did it on purpose or was unconsciously was anyone's guess. The Jedi Master could make grown men of many species and walks of life feel small, yet children seemed unbothered by his presence. Solon shifted slightly as he looked around and shrugged. "I've been really bored, Master Windu," he confessed, his frankness causing a round of chuckles and amusement from the council, Mace included. "It's hard being patient, but Mom says I need to have grace and trust the council because you only have my best interests at heart. I'm still really bored, though. I really want to start training." Mace nodded, perhaps remembering what it was to be so young and full of energy with nothing to do. "Your mother speaks from a place of wisdom, Solon. Patience is indeed a virtue for any Jedi, though I admit it is no small task for someone your age, especially given your circumstances, and I know it's been difficult, and I apologize for keeping you waiting so long." "It's okay. I understand." Obi-Wan and Mace shared a look of surprise. "You understand?" Mace echoed. Solon rocked back and forth from his heels to his toes several times. "I'm not a normal youngling," he said, glancing at his mother. "My path won't be the same as others, no matter what the council decides." There was resignation in the way Solon spoke, like he had already made peace with the possibility that he might not have a place within the temple walls. Obi-Wan flexed his hand. He struggled with the desire to reach out to place a reassuring hand on Solon's shoulder, but he held back. Somehow it didn't feel like it was his place to comfort him. Not yet. So you understand why the council had to take its time in our deliberations? Mace asked. Solon nodded. Mom says the biggest decisions in life boil down to what's right versus what's easy, and sometimes it's hard for people to know which is which. What is right and what is easy? Mace mused, nodding along with an admiration that very few were privy to. What do you feel is the right course of action? Solon shrugged. I don't know, Master Windu. I've thought about it a lot. What I would do if the council decided I couldn't be a Jedi, and I'm not really sure what I would do. The brightness in his eyes dimmed a bit, and he looked up at his mother before continuing. Mom says if the answer is no, then she'll teach me herself. But I think it would be better for me to learn and grow with people like me. Solon looked back at Mace and huffed out a heavy sigh. I'm not sure what the right decision is, Master Windu. But we still have to make one. Mace straightened, his eyebrows arching in surprise. Obi-Wan looked down at Solon with a grin, pride swelling in his chest as he marveled at the boy's maturity, struggling to reconcile the 10-year-old before him with the sage-like wisdom that flowed from his lips. That's a long sentence. I pulled it off, but it is a bit long. You speak with an insight beyond your years, Solon. Mace's index finger tapped on his armrest several times in contemplation. Tell me, Solon, do you still wish to become a Jedi? I'm ready to try, Master Windu. Try? Mace echoed, a playful glint dancing in his eyes. Solon shrugged again, biting the inside of his cheek before speaking. Just before I have visions of futures that could be doesn't mean... Okay, just because I have visions of futures that could be doesn't mean I know what's going to happen for sure. But I do know that if I don't try, then nothing will happen. This brought a full-fledged smile to Mace's face, and a chuckle rumbled in his chest. It was hard not to be moved by Solon's optimism. I understand you are quite fond of stories, Solon. Solon nodded. Okay, I'm going to pause. So we're going to observe something else that we've talked about before, which is in Star Wars, there's a lot of formality. So we do use the characters' names quite frequently. However, I don't know if I would have Solon here and then immediately have Solon respond. Another thing we want to watch out for is, like, I kind of feel like this dialogue would be separated from Solon's response because it's not him speaking. So we want to look at our dialogue and look at who it is that's doing the talking, because typically your reader will associate the dialogue with the first name of the person after it. This, I believe, is Master Windu, and then you have Solon's response, which I would put in a separate paragraph. Now, I saw that a few paragraphs back with something else, and I didn't mention it because when I read the whole thing, it worked out. But it's the second time I've noticed it, so that makes me think I should go back and should have pointed it out, but it's reading so well I didn't want to stop. So I'm kind of highlighting here, and I'm going to scroll back for a second. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, I scrolled back, and I paused while I did it so you didn't have to wait for me to figure it out. All right. Mace looked from Cressida to Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan, no one would begrudge you if you chose to step away from this situation. Okay. So Mace is looking from Cressida to Obi-Wan. And Obi-Wan is our point of view here. And so he observes Cressida stiffen. When we have dialogue and it ends and we start the next sentence with a name, it usually tells us who spoke, but we already know it was Mace from this pre-sentence here. Okay, so that's why I think it worked, and I decided not to mention it. But then we have Cressida stiffened, her eyes darting around the room like a panicked creature seeking an escape. And I kind of thought that maybe the next person speaking might be Cressida. And so that's why I was inclined to want this to start a new sentence, because we are shifting our attention from Mace, okay, and Mace speaking, to Cressida, all right? But Mace continues to speak, and that's why I didn't mention it. I kind of felt like overall it worked, but for a second, I kind of wanted it to be its own paragraph, and that is why. So I didn't mention it because it was reading beautifully, and it kind of worked out as Mace was the one that continued to speak. But for a second, I wondered if it was going to be Cressida, and I was prepared to stop if that happened, but it went okay, and I decided to let it go, except when we get further down, and now I've probably lost my spot. Let's see if I can find my spot again, because I clicked the thing. Okay, and here's my spot. And so now when it happens, When it's happening again, I'm inclined to point it out because it's happened more than once, and I just want you to be on the lookout for it. So, okay, this brought a full-fledged smile to Mace's face, and a chuckle rumbled in his chest. It was hard not to be moved by Solon's optimism. I understand you are quite fond of stories, Solon. Solon nodded, and there was a little bounce of excitement in his toes. Then I have one I think you'll enjoy. This council once saw another young boy like yourself stand before us many years back. He too was naturally very gifted with the Force, and many saw great potential in him. He looked past Solon for a moment before returning to the story. Some hesitated to see him begin training because, like you, he too came from outside our temple walls. He was very close to his mother. His life had not been easy. He had been born a slave, and some feared the consequences of training him. Solon looked from Mace to his mother and back as if seeking confirmation that she, too, was hearing the same thing he was. She smiled and nodded forward back to Master Windu, gesturing for him to listen. All right, so we're reading really well. We're going to keep going. I just wanted to observe the Solon and the name part, and I wanted to observe being careful, like who is speaking and then what name follows it, because it can lead your reader to think that it is that person speaking. All right, so I've pointed out 2 incidents, and we're going to continue. He was deemed too old to start training, lacking the formal instruction typical of younger initiates. Known for his impulsive nature, he made no effort to conceal his feelings, which further set him apart from others. The Jedi who brought him before the council was a wise man and was deeply convinced of the boy's potential. But he had a penchant for interpreting things in his own way, which led to disagreements with the council. Yet he believed the boy had a greater purpose than simply prod racing in the desert. When this master died, the boy's fate was uncertain. He was directionless and vulnerable, and some thought it might be best to return him to his mother in the desert. Okay. Solon's fingers twitched with anticipation. His toes were permanently curled in his boots. He leaned forward as Mace spoke, hanging on every word. But there was one who was resolute that he should be trained. He was determined to see the boy as a Jedi, no matter the obstacles. Under this Jedi's tutelage, the boy grew to be a wise, compassionate Jedi master, a brave and cunning warrior. Today he sits among this council, and it was your father who trained him. Solon's mouth was now hanging completely open, and he looked to Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan looked as humble as any could, bowing his head. He was grateful for his beard because he was fairly certain he felt the warmth of a blush creeping up his ears. Whether it was from the praise, the way Solon looked at him with awe, or the fact that Cressida was looking at him too, was anyone's guess. Obi-Wan turned and looked behind him, and Solon followed his father's line of sight to where Anakin Skywalker sat proudly. He offered a nod to Obi-Wan and a roguish wink to Solon. With a mix of admiration and excitement coursing through him, Solon looked back at Obi-Wan, unable to contain his wonder. Oh my gosh, that was just beautiful. I love the blush creeping up. I love oh my gosh, great use of his facial features. Love it. Love it, love it. It wasn't an easy journey for Master Skywalker. He proved himself through his dedication and his actions. Mace paused, casting a glance at Anakin, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. He proved this council wrong. Okay, I'm going to pause again. I hate pausing. I hate it so much because it's reading so beautifully. I know why I tripped on that. Anakin and Anne. So it's the 3 ANs in a row as why I did that. I think it reads fine. I wouldn't change it. I'm just observing why I tripped over it. That is what happened there. Okay. Obi-Wan felt a warmth spread through him as he recalled his and Anakin's triumphs and struggles. It was gratifying to be vindicated in such a way. Anakin certainly deserved his moment in the sun, and Obi-Wan was proud of the man his Padawan had grown into. As he looked at Solon, he could see a similar future taking shape. You mentioned when we first met that oops. What happened here? Okay, let me try again. You mentioned when we first met that you worried for your mother's well-being due to the circumstances of your birth. Solon's smile fell, and he grabbed his mother's hand tightly, positioning himself more firmly in front of her, a small but determined shield. Mace held up a pacifying hand. I promised you then that no punishment would fall on your mother, and I mean to keep my word. She did nothing wrong, nor did your father, and most certainly neither have you. Your mother will face no consequences. Her strength and dedication to your well-being is to be admired. Okay, so If we asked why I tripped over this sentence a bit, it is a little bit of a long sentence. And I think what it is the like when there's a lot of words that link our words together in close proximity, it tends to not read well out loud, at least out loud. So that's probably what happened there. Honestly, I don't think there's anything to change here. You mentioned when we first met, and your punctuation's so good that I don't know, and it's a continuation, so it's not like we need a comma. It it's just these words together did not roll off the tongue. That's basically what happened. Okay. Let's see. Solon smiled at Mace and blew out a breath of relief. We find ourselves in unique times, and as the galaxy changes, the Jedi must adapt. Therefore, it is the decision of this council that you be permitted to begin training as a Jedi immediately under the supervision of your parents. Solon's face split into a wide smile as he took in Mace's words, still clutching his mother's hand and shaking it with happiness. He looked back and smiled at her brightly before looking at Obi-Wan with the same excitement, all but hopping up and down like a grasshopper. The council members remained largely unresponsive, but several members smiled with Solon. When your parents believe you are ready, you will undertake the initiate trials. These trials will test your skills, your character, and your connection to the Force. Should you pass, you will be eligible for a Jedi to take you as their Padawan. The air around Solon felt as though it was vibrating, and he nodded along with Mace's words, overwhelmed into a sort of speechlessness. I had to pause and go do parenting type things, but I am back. Okay. But know this, young one, the path of a Jedi is not easy. Yours will be harder than most. You will need to train twice as hard, remain steadfast, and avoid giving in to fear or anger. Are you prepared for this challenge? Yes, I am. I'm ready. When do we start? Can we start now? Solon asked eagerly, his answers and questions all tumbling out in one long sentence. Mace tried to keep a straight face, but it was proving difficult with Solon's enthusiasm. There may be times you will want to give up. Your journey will demand great strength and resilience from you. You have your parents to guide you, and the council has faith in you. Solon straightened his back and his arms snapped to his sides. I won't let you down, I promise. Mace nodded approvingly. Very well, Solon Cal. Good luck. The relief in the room was palpable, but there was one more thing to be addressed. The Wampa in the room. There remains one final matter to address before we conclude. Obi-Wan shifted his stance, glancing briefly at Cressida, and to his surprise she was looking back at him. He wanted to take a step closer to her, but he wasn't sure if it was for his benefit or hers, so he chose to stay where he was. What good was a pillar of strength if it swayed? Regarding the relationship between Master Kenobi and Cressida Vox, Mace looked back and forth between Obi-Wan and Cressida as if assessing for something. We cannot ignore the potential risks of attachments in complicated dynamics such as these, and they have long been a point of concern with the Order. However, it is also true that the Force often moves in ways we don't expect. There are always paths forward. Master Skywalker has shown us that it's possible to overcome such struggles when the stakes are high. Obi-Wan fought the urge to look back at Anakin. The Jedi Code does not forbid emotions, but it demands discipline over them. We do not pass judgment on how you choose to spend your time or how you approach your responsibilities regarding your son. Nor do we question the bond you both share as parents. What matters most now is your ability to work together for Solon's benefit. To do this, you must communicate and put whatever differences or indifferences you have aside. There is no reason to believe that both of you cannot navigate this challenge. We expect nothing less. He paused, his gaze now focusing on Solon. Change is an inevitable part of life, and only through adaptation can the Jedi Order endure for another 1,000 years. In times of great upheaval, it is not weakness to seek guidance when needed. No one expects you to face this alone. The Council remains a resource should either of you find yourselves uncertain. There was an unmistakable message beneath his words, a reminder that they would be watched carefully, but also that they had the Council's trust. We wish you three success in this endeavor. May the Force be with you. The Council's business on this matter is concluded until further notice. As the Council members began to rise, the formality of the moment ended. The room shifted from solemn to something warmer, more human. Solon, unable to contain himself any longer, threw his arms around his mother, his excitement bubbling over in unrestrained laughter. Cressida staggered back a step, momentarily thrown back by the small force of their son, before wrapping him in a tight embrace. A radiant smile lit up her face, one that Obi-Wan hadn't seen since a long time ago. I'm going to pause. You've got 2 echoes in this paragraph. It's reading so beautifully I don't want to pause, but I need to. We have an echo on back in the same line. And then we have, what was it? I think it's face. Is it face? Why do I think there's an echo on face? Maybe it was an echo on a sound and not a word. As the council members began to rise, the formality of the moment ended. The room shifted from solemn to something warmer, more human. Solon, unable to contain himself any longer, threw his arms around his mother, his excitement bubbling over in unrestrained laughter. Cressida staggered back a step, momentarily thrown back by the small force of their son, wrapping him in a tight embrace. A radiant smile lit up her face, one that Obi-Wan hadn't seen since a long time ago. Yes, it's the do not change it. It would read perfectly fine quietly. I think it read okay out loud. It's just there. My brain caught because there was an echo on a sound, and that's just how my brain works. It doesn't always mean anything. It's just how it works. So I have to observe it and figure out why it hung up. Okay. Let's see. What did I tell you, Starlight? Nothing to worry about, she said, a far gentle version of I told you so. All in due time, Solon. First things first. Oh, there it is. Sorry, I missed a whole line. So sorry. What did I tell you, Starlight? Nothing to worry about, she said, a far gentle version of I told you so. You were right, Mom. Now we can stay. I can't believe it. I'm going to be a Jedi. Okay, so Solon's super excited, and it's been shown through his actions. And right now he doesn't have an action that he's shown. He's just got his enthusiasm, which is fantastic, except, and this is fine in fan fiction, okay? There's so many things you can do in fan fiction that I would not call out. But just to be a good beta reader and to be a good crit, I'm going to point out you have 1, 2, 3, 4 exclamation points. And I have learned and been told numerous times to be conservative when using the exclamation point, so that when you do use it, it has the punch, the emphasis that you really need in carrying out your read. Okay, so I'm just going to say that it's reading beautifully. I saw the opportunity to drop a tidbit that has been shared with me and has proven true, actually. Kind of like when I try not to use my characters' names all the time, I do it. I go back in my writing, and I'll write something to the quality you have, and I will catch myself doing it. And I don't know why we do it. I think we're just trying to be very clear about who is speaking to whom. And in your particular fandom, it lends itself to the formality, so I'm lenient with it. But when I go back and look at my own stuff, I am definitely like, oh, I need to take some of these out and swap it with something else. So my exclamation points are kind of up there in that same little realm, and it is something that I do screen for. Okay, here we go. All in due time, Solon. First things first. The sight of it should have filled him with relief, with joy, but instead a heavy weight settled in his chest as Solon's jumping calmed and Cressida looked him in the eye. We should talk. It was the first time she spoke to him, truly spoke to him. Solon stood beside them, brimming with happiness about the next chapter in his life about to unfold and the people he would spend it with. The feeling of dread crept in, the same dread he had felt since the council had first broached this matter. Their past, unresolved, complicated, could not simply be set aside. Yes, of course, he replied with a tightness in his words. I'm going to pause. So we're in Obi-Wan's point of view. And all in good time, Solon, first things first, the sight of it should have been filled Obi-Wan with relief. Let's see. So Cressida is speaking, but Obi-Wan is looking. All in due time, Solon. It flowed when I read it, but for a second I wasn't sure who was talking, and right around here is where I started noticing that we're in Obi-Wan's point of view. So you didn't switch that. We're fine there. But this is one of those times when we actually should have used his name. And I kind of think it should be all in due time, Solon, first things first. And I don't want to be generic, but I'm going to be generic just so that I can get out what I'm trying to tell you, okay? So don't use the words I'm using, but take the example, okay? All in due time, Solon, first things first, Cressida said. We don't want to do that. But I'm just saying you're associating that dialogue with Cressida. New paragraph. The sight of it should have filled Obi-Wan with relief, with joy, but instead a heavy weight settled in his chest as Solon's jumping calmed and Cressida looked Obi-Wan in the eye? I'm thinking it's Obi-Wan because she's saying we should talk, okay? And Cressida's attention shifted to Obi-Wan, shifted to him. Because if you have it clear that it's Obi-Wan and it's its own paragraph, okay? Yes, Cressida's attention shifted to Obi-Wan. We should talk, okay? I hope you followed that, and that it wasn't too clunky of a guidance. It was the first time she spoke to him. Yes, okay. So, and go ahead and say him because we've reminded them that it's Obi-Wan whose point of view we're in, because we have Cressida speaking to Solon. And then she's shifting her attention to Obi-Wan. And I just want to make that super, super clear because you have two male characters in a close proximity that she is interacting with, okay? And then I think the rest of it's going to roll just fine. All right. Where did we leave off? I'm going to start right here. The feeling of dread crept in, the same dread he had felt since the council had first broached this matter. Their past, unresolved, complicated, could not simply be set aside. Yes, of course, he replied with a tightness in his words. He hadn't known the decision of the council until just now, but somehow, even if he did, he wasn't sure if he would have been prepared for the moment. Now it was upon him, time to discuss how this would work. He suddenly felt very ill-equipped for this conversation. Heat rose up in his chest. He felt his palms grow sweaty. He needed a way out. He needed space to breathe, to think. Unfortunately, it will have to wait just a bit longer, I'm afraid. I have some matters I need to attend to first. Later then, Cressida agreed with an empty nod. Obi-Wan placed a hand on Solon's shoulder, trying to comfort him, but the gesture felt somewhat robotic and distant. Solon managed to muster a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Obi-Wan was quick to excuse himself, his robes billowing behind him with each step. Leaving Cressida and Solon standing there in the empty chamber, the air of excitement was gone. Solon looked utterly crestfallen, as if the balloon of happiness in his chest had deflated. "I'm sorry, Solon," Cressida said, brushing the hair out of his face. "It's okay, Mom. I just thought that maybe he—" Solon shook his head and looked at the ground. "Never mind." His voice trailed off, but the disappointment lingered. "Can we go for a run?" "Of course." He needs to clear his little thoughts. Okay. Here we go. We got a break. We're going to start a new scene. I wonder whose point of view we're going to be in. Let's find out. Master Kenobi wasn't one to avoid challenges. He faced them head-on, armed with fearlessness and a wit sharp enough to put any blade to shame. But in the days following the latest council meeting, Obi-Wan had become unusually elusive. For those who knew him well, this was most certainly out of character. So what was different now? Everything. This wasn't like anything he'd ever faced before. There were no battles to fight, no enemies to confront. In fact, there wasn't even an enemy. Only a 10-year-old boy in a conversation that was just as long in the making. How was he even supposed to begin? Where was he supposed to begin? What could he say to Cressida? What would she say to him? He couldn't imagine she'd be terribly happy with him after avoiding this for several days. His excuses to put this meeting off were shallow and transparent at best. It wasn't as if there was a war out there to win. He never thought he'd miss the chaos of battle. He had a bit to explain, and even more to make up for. Of that much he was certain. He paused mid-step as a rather obscure thought entered his mind. Would she be angry with him for getting her pregnant in the first place? Though that wasn't entirely his fault. Not that Solon was a negative consequence by any means, but it certainly took two to waltz, didn't it? Cressida would have taken precautions, wouldn't she? Some sort of contraception? He was admittedly a bit ignorant on the subject, though it wasn't as though he had asked. He had been preoccupied with other things, like the warmth of her skin against his, the taste of her lips, the way she whispered his name and trembled at his touch. Stars. How did he get himself into this mess? He was smarter than this. At least he thought he was. Would she be angry with him? He shuddered at the thought. He'd never been on the receiving end of Cressida's temper. Few people had. But if it was anything like he suspected, he might need to brace himself for a storm colder than the ice caves of Ilum. He continued trying to navigate the labyrinths of thoughts in his head. At multiple points, he'd even taken notes, bullet points about things he wanted to discuss or questions he had. But in the end, he'd scrapped them all, realizing there was no real way to prepare for this conversation. It would have to begin by acknowledging that night. How could they move forward without addressing it? He didn't know, but eventually Obi-Wan found himself walking through the halls toward one of the lecture rooms where younglings gathered for their lessons. His mind had been so preoccupied with the upcoming conversation that he barely registered his surroundings until it hit him all at once. He had arrived. Stepping into the room, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. The familiar tapestries lined the walls, the ancient scrolls, the worn mats on the floors, and the subtle scent of incense lingered in the air, mixed with the aroma of something else, something foreign and sterile. He shook his head. Perhaps the cleaning droids had just come through. Fuzzy memories of his own as a youngling flooded his mind. Countless hours had been spent there, a low-powered training saber in his hands, honing his skills under the watchful gaze of Jedi Masters. There had always been comfort in the routine back then, a simplicity to those early lessons. But nothing was simple anymore. Oh well, simplicity was for cowards. Time to rip the backed-up patch off. In the center of the room, Cressida was waiting with her back to him, fixating on something in her hands. For a moment, his nerves flared. They hadn't been alone together in any fashion since that night. In fact, he couldn't even remember the last words they'd spoken outside of that instance. It felt like a lifetime ago. As he stepped closer, Obi-Wan's eyes fell on the object that had captured Cressida's attention. She was holding a small object. We have echo on object. She was holding a small metal object, one of the simple devices used to teach younglings basic control over the Force. A miniature speeder designed to hover and move with the guidance of child's thoughts. It was such a small thing, yet so pivotal in their lives, and he smiled when he saw it. He remembered the struggle well, the hours spent trying to move it even an inch, the frustration, all over something so seemingly insignificant but so monumental to a youngling's progress. The little speeder floated in Cressida's palm, lazily making circles in the air. There was something so endearing about the sight. A Jedi Knight playing with the very same device that had once reduced them both to tears. And just like that, all the tension he had carried with him, the nerves that had knotted his stomach for days, seemed to melt away. In that moment, she wasn't the woman whose anger he feared, or the mother of a son he'd never expected to have. She was simply Cressida, the person who once upon a time had been his safe place. Warm, steady, familiar. "It's been a while since I've seen one of these," she said, turning the little speeder over in her hands like she was making a study of it. He clasped his hands firmly behind his back, as was his habit when he didn't know what to do with them. Get an echo on hands. You could use fingers maybe right there, and that would solve that. Indeed, it felt like a lifetime ago since we were younglings, learning the ways of the Force in this very room. Nervous, excited, afraid. He wasn't sure if he was talking about the past or the present, though. He supposed it didn't matter. The emotions were still very much the same. Cressida chuckled softly, her fingers gently tracing the contours of the speeder. "I made something like this for Solon once." "Oh?" Obi-Wan asked. She nodded, a fond smile tugging at her lips. "Clay was hard to come by. The planet was too dry, and we couldn't spare the water. But I managed to gather some runoff from one of the factories to make it. It turned out hard and brittle, staining my hands a bright orange for a week. It took hours, and to be honest, my skills were rather lacking." She let out a laugh, a mix of breath and amusement. The first time he tried to make it fly, it smashed right into a wall and shattered to pieces. He was 3. The image of Solon's cheeks stained in tears, so distraught over such a simple mishap, tugged at Obi-Wan's heart. He could just see Solon holding up the broken pieces for Cressida to fix, sniffling in despair, and what she described down to her Togruta-like orange hands. It made him smile. "Poor babe," cried Rivers. "It took me ages to console him. I promised we'd make another one together and try again." He looked at the ground. He wasn't sure why. She was doing it again, curling her toes within her boots. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hand expectantly. Cressida held the speeder out to him, and he felt a surge of excitement. Focusing his thoughts, the speeder lifted, hovering a few inches above their hands. It moved gently, responding to his guidance. This room has seen many dramatic chases and desperately heroic dogfights. I'm going to pause. You've got an echo on hands, and I'm going to observe what I think might be a repetitive habit of both Cressida and Solon seem to curl their toes within their shoes. I'm pretty sure both of them have done it a couple of times. It's fine if you observe that both of them have the habit, and maybe Obi-Wan muses over that, in which case I would say don't change anything. And I'm inclined to say don't change anything because it's reading so beautifully, but I do want to note that I did observe a repetitive action. I'm kind of feeling like it's something they both do, like mother, like son kind of thing, or there you go. Anyway, we're going to keep going. He remembered how heavy the little speeder had felt when all he could use to lift it was his mind. At the time, it seemed as impossible as raising a life-size starship. It took a little bit to master the art of miniature flight, and it wasn't without its trials. He wondered if Solon was like him, and if, in frustration after several failed attempts, he had ever hurled a toy at the ground in a fit of anger. Back when we all wanted to be fighter pilots and the galaxy seemed so large. Her insinuation that the galaxy was, in fact, not so large was comical. If anything, the galaxy was larger now than it had been then. Did it take him very long to become proficient? About 4 days. More than a few ships met rather destructive ends when they crashed into the floor. She chuckled. He hurled one at the ground when he got frustrated, but in his defense, he was quite tired. Little boys get rather cranky when they need a nap. Well, that answered that question. Once a nap was had, though, he took to it quite well, and we soon had a whole fleet of clay starships. Obi-Wan could see it now, bright orange destroyers, assault ships, gunships, and starfighters. What little boy didn't love playing with ships and going on grand adventures? A quiet moment enveloped them, their thoughts drawing closer until it felt as if they almost touched. He gets it from you, Obi-Wan. The ability to connect with the Force so effortlessly. Her words stirred a mix of emotions within him as the little speeder hovered between them. The warmth of the compliment wrapped around him, filling the space with an ease he hadn't felt in ages. I apologize for putting this off, he began, the need to acknowledge his actions bubbling to the surface. Cressida waved it off. No need to apologize. You have many responsibilities as a council member. Solon understands too. Her compassion was almost unbearable. She was being far too kind for his comfort, far too understanding. He had expected her to be upset, but instead, she seemed surprisingly accommodating. While he was grateful for her kindness, it felt like it was time to address the wampa in the room between them. Or them, sorry. Their connection dated back to when they were nearly Solon's age, bright-eyed and eager Padawans. Years of friendship, shared histories involving their masters, and the heartache they both endured after losing their mentors had woven an intricate tapestry of familiarity between them. And then one night, it all changed. The memory was etched into his mind with a clarity that transcended time. Back then, he had been a young, newly knighted Jedi, suddenly overwhelmed by the responsibility of training a prodigious young Anakin Skywalker, a boy the same age as his son was now. He had felt lost, sitting in his master's old quarters, draped in Qui-Gon's oversized robe, adrift in a sea of sorrow, so heavy with despair and hopelessness, but then she had appeared. Despite having had no word from her in 2 years, she pulled him from the depths of his heartache. Their conversation had shifted from shared laughter over old stories to shared disgust over the strange root stew Qui-Gon favored. Then, in a blink, Cressida had found her way into his arms, clinging to him as he had clung to her. Her touch had been a balm against his wounded heart, a soothing salve for his pain. It had been a night of 100 kisses, some hungry, some sad, some wildly passionate, each one imbued with need and longing. Cressida's understanding of the pain of losing a master had forged an unbreakable bond between them. For those precious hours, he had experienced a wholeness, a sense of being desired and needed like never before. It had been wonderful and overwhelming at the same time. They had fallen asleep, naked and exhausted in one another's arms, safe and warm. For a brief moment, the world around them faded, and it felt as if time had stretched into eternity. But morning arrived too soon, and with it, she slipped away. leaving behind only a lingering warmth and a memory that somehow in the subsequent years he managed to forget entirely. Snapping out of his reverie, Obi-Wan returned to the present, where Cressida was maneuvering the speeder through intricate loops in the air. He didn't even realize she called the speeder back to her, performing acrobatics that none of them as younglings could have ever dreamed of achieving. He watched the speeder make a series of figure eights and then a barrel roll before hovering back over her palm. He could properly see her now that he wasn't actively avoiding her. Time had etched its marks, yet her beauty remained as captivating as it had been when he last saw her. Her eyes still possessed a mesmerizing quality. Her smile could illuminate even the darkest corners of the galaxy. However, her smiles had become rarer, less vibrant than they had been before the loss of her master. They never quite regained their full brilliance. Cressida, I know that. She turned to face him so sharply that it startled him, the speeder falling to her hand like the engines had lost propulsion. Her fingers closed around it, grounding the little ship. Someone struggles with communicating when he's frustrated. She cut in a little too quick. Was that a tremor in her voice? The more he struggles, the less he talks. He could see the quick shift in her eyes as she focused intently on Solon's training, as if this was the only thing that mattered now. For the briefest moment, he wondered, was she as uncertain, as fearful of this conversation as he was? Okay, a little punctuation thing right there, just right there. It's important to keep encouraging him, especially when he retreats inward. He's eager to impress you more than you know. And that means he's going to push himself too hard, overextend, become overly emotional, and make mistakes that he normally wouldn't. It's not because he isn't disciplined or that he lacks focus. Far from it. When he sets his mind to something, he won't rest until he perfects his craft or he slips into exhaustion. You have to all but drag him away from what he's doing. He can be a very stubborn boy. Where might he have gotten that trait from? He pushed the joke aside. Now wasn't the time. This was serious. For a moment, he considered interrupting her. He'd intended to start with the beginning, but perhaps that was too difficult for her. He certainly understood that. It wasn't as if he knew what he had hoped to say about it anyway, or what could even be said after so long. Still, something about her avoidance gnawed at him. Like something shimmering just out of sight, an absurdly self-conscious thought crossed his mind. What if she looked back on that night with regret? Or worse, indifference. What if it hadn't been as good for her as it had been for him? The idea struck him like a bolt out of nowhere, and the mild panic it stirred made him inwardly cringe. An odd thing for him to focus on right now. Pay attention, Obi-Wan, he chastised himself as Cressida's voice pulled him back. His meditation skills are strong, one of the few things we've been able to focus on extensively. He leans on it whenever he feels overwhelmed. It's how he pulls himself back together after a difficult day, and I've found it helps him regulate his more unique abilities. Of course, Solon had unique abilities, as he had demonstrated that day in the council chamber, and he'd been brimming with questions at the time. Yes, you mentioned something during the council meeting about dreams, he said, eager to shift his mind to practical matters that he understood. When did that start? Cressida nodded. Yes, the dreams started when he was about 6, and they've been unpredictable and intense, but a fairly uncommon occurrence. A critical look came over their face as the depth over their face. Her face? A critical look came over, I think it's her. I think it's meant to be her. A critical look came over her face as the depths of her eyes darkened with shame. At first, I dismissed them as simple bad dreams and a little boy's imagination. I was wrong. She looked disappointed with herself. You couldn't have known, but I should have. How could they be only dreams with parents like us? Either way, it's no excuse. She cleared her throat and continued. When he was 9, he started getting them when he was awake. Sometimes they're visions, but more often they're fragmented and difficult to make sense of. When they're especially vivid, they can leave him with headaches or feeling drained for hours after. His psychometry is more reliable, but since it's tied to his emotions when he's struggling and anxious, the simplest object can reach through to him. There have been times he's picked up something as simple as a rock and immediately become overwhelmed, thrown up, and passed out, among other things. I've tried to help him manage them, but admittedly I'm no expert, and I wasn't able to do much. I have no doubts you did everything in your power to help him. Jedis with visions don't grow out of them, they grow into them, Obi-Wan insisted. She paused for a moment, nodding appreciatively. And there are gaps in his training, of course. We haven't had the most consistent environment, but where there are holes, you'll find he's also quite adept at certain things for his age. Cressida's face lit up with a slight smile when she spoke about Solin's excitement for lightsaber combat. Obi-Wan was surprised to learn that Solon was familiar with all 7 forms of lightsaber combat, though he was far from mastering any. Mastering any. It was all theoretical, of course. Lightsaber training was something we couldn't really practice, so he's eager to begin that. He's very calculated, and I think he has a disposition for Form 3. Sarisu? Your specialty, she confirmed. When he's comfortable, when he feels safe, he's a quick learner. He just needs to know you're there to help, not to judge him. I would never presume to judge him, or you. Personal stories help him focus, Cressida added, cutting him off once again. What was this wall she was putting up? He responds well to relatable experiences, especially when they're relevant to what he's trying to learn. It gives him a sense of connection and purpose, but he can also get a little too wrapped up in stories and adventures, so you'll have to keep him on track. Right, stories as teaching tools, but don't let him get carried away. Anakin hadn't been so different. He filed away each detail she gave him. It would all be crucial to Solin's training, but that was something Obi-Wan had already learned well with Anakin. I'm going to pause. I think the little quotation marks up here might be turned the wrong way. I don't know why formatting does that, but it does it to me too. It might not be. It might just be looking at it wrong. Okay, here we go. And like Anakin, it was clear that despite the patchwork nature of his training, his son had immense potential. Cressida had done more than he could have expected, and he'd been unprepared for the depth of information she was relaying to him. It all came so fast. She talked with her hands and paced enough so that Obi-Wan was constantly turning to face her or keep up with her. It felt like they made laps around the room. Each movement and gesture was fluid and animated, drawing him into her words. Occasionally, her speech would slow as if she were trying to remember something crucial. She'd snap her fingers, trying to summon the thought before deciding to abandon it and move on. Other times, she would stare off into the horizon, leaving Obi-Wan curious as to what caught her attention before she'd pick right back up again. Each word was like a thread, stitching together a tapestry of wisdom, and it was all so much to take in, but parts of it reminded him of his early days with Anakin. It left him almost feeling a bit dizzy. A nagging thought lingered at the back of his mind, something screaming to be remembered, but it was drowned out until, like sand slipping through his fingers. I would take out the until. It was drowned out like sand. Yeah. But it was drowned out like sand slipping through his fingers. As the conversation drew to a close, they had sorted out the basics of how things would proceed, times to meet, topics to discuss, and a general understanding of how to work together. There was obviously, I think would should be was. Let's try it that way. There was obviously room for improvements to be made, but some things could only be discovered through experience. Though he wished he'd brought a data pad with him, no matter, he would remember, he hoped. This has been most instructive. I appreciate your help with all of this, Obi-Wan said, trying to convey his gratitude as he looked to the little speeder, which was obediently returned back to his outstretched hand. He had missed so much in his son's life, and how he approached training would be almost as important as the training itself. For the first time, he felt ready. Tell me, what kind of pilot is our son? He asked cautiously as he held the toy in his hand, making it fly by swinging it around in the air without the use of the Force. Yet no response came. He turned around only to find that Cressida had vanished, her presence fleeting as a passing breeze. The warmth instantly vanished, and Obi-Wan's chest fell as he stood alone in the training room, clutching the toy and grappling with the weight of a bittersweet memory. Oh my gosh. Okay, really quick. You had a little echo in that very last with the vanished. And because it's a word we don't use commonly, you might want to tweak that. But other than that, this read so beautifully. I so enjoyed reading it. I'm enjoying Cressida. I like this sort of mystery that surrounds her. And yet she's as endearing as Padme in her own way. And so I'm liking the character. And I like how you show her. And I like Obi-Wan just being completely out of his element. He does not know what to do. I mean, he has no idea what to do with as far as Cressida. I mean, he did try, and I think she's probably thinking in her mind, let's just stick to business. It'll just be easier if we just stick to business. I'm guessing, because I have totally been where she's been. It's completely relatable. So I'm so enjoying this. Okay. I see you. Okay, notes. I see you there listening and not subscribing to Red's channel. You should know that if you don't subscribe to her, then I'm going to be hiding in your closet later, waiting to jump out and scare you. You're going to spill your water and bedtime snacks and everything, but I'm going to feel bad. And the whole thing will be terrible and awkward. Just terrible. Okay. And finally, these crazy kids talked. Or did they? I mean, I think Obi-Wan was going to make an attempt to get down to the very foundation. He was going to start in the beginning, and he really didn't know where he was going with it, but he was going to try. I mean, and then she's like, I think she's as nervous as he is. And oh my gosh, I really like the two of them. I do. And I'm enjoying this. And like Solon kind of parallels Anakin in so many ways, but I like that you've given Anakin a happier ending than what his fate was. And so I'm enjoying that he's not gone all dark side, and that it's kind of like got a happier, at least so far. So I'm enjoying that. Okay. And Solon was absolutely adorable and it's totally fun to read. Okay. Let's see. And so these kids talked, or did they? Are we getting curious about Cressida? Pity the Jedi doesn't have family counseling. Lord knows these two could certainly use it. Anyhow, I'm off to edit the next chapter. Have a lovely day, my friends. And I'm serious about that. Closet bit. Oh, bye, Red. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I am absolutely enjoying this story. And I think that it reads so well that if you did go over, if you were here and you went back to the beginning and you listened to it, you're going to enjoy that. And I have already left kudos on the story, so it won't let me leave it again. And I think I'm probably able to leave a comment on each thing, which I might do really quick before I wrap up, or I'm going to wrap up and then do that. And so anybody who wants to read ahead can. I'll have a link to the story in my description. Thank you to The Great Wicked for your support and for trusting me with your story. And I'm so enjoying it. And I hope to see you guys for the next chapter. Bye for now.